I do believe we have Elizabeth Connor on from MMB. And I believe she'll be sharing some information with us as far as the grant process and the role MMB has with the infrastructure bill, as well as the capital funds project and the general fund. So with that, Elizabeth, if you're on.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. And I want to take just a minute to introduce a couple colleagues who I'm thrilled have been able to join me to cover kind of the broad swath of funding opportunities related to broadband. Tom Carr is an executive budget officer at MMB. He specializes in federal funds, all things federal funds, and so you can imagine the scope of his responsibilities given all of the federal spending in the last really year and a half or so. Mary Ann Conboy is our capital budget coordinator from MMB, and she is an expert in many things, including the Capital Projects Fund. So I will hand the baton off to them. I believe Tom is going to kick it off first, and then pass it to Mary Ann to talk about both the state and local fiscal relief or recovery funds that Tom will cover, and Mary Ann will talk about the Capital Projects Fund, and then I will talk about the IIJA and go into a bit of detail around the broadband funding available in that bill.
Awesome. Well, we all look forward to it and think that you'll find the task force to be very engaged on this topic. So, great.
Good morning, everyone. As Elizabeth opened up, my name is Tom Carr, and I'm here to talk about the American Rescue Plan, specifically the state and local fiscal recovery funds. So in total, about $8.5 billion flowed to the state. And this is largely thought of in these three big buckets. So first, there were the local fiscal recovery funds, of which about $2.1 billion came to counties, cities, and even small towns. About $2.8 billion came directly to the state of Minnesota. And these first two buckets are flexible in nature. In a second, kind of break down exactly what the eligible uses are. But the third bucket we call programmatic funds, and this is about $3.5 billion in total that came to the state. And this includes funds that are very specific in nature. So, for example, child care stabilization funds, funds that went to school districts and things. So those are funds that were highly specific in nature. They're often supplements to existing programs. So these are not funds that we can reallocate to other things. These were generally very specific funds. Looking at the state and local fiscal recovery funds, so those first two buckets, the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury has, from inception to now, come out with hundreds of pages of guidance, and really these are historically large in nature, but also very broad in nature, and they largely fall into these four big buckets. So public health, which could include anything, from personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, testing. So, whether at home tests or big testing events around the state. Serving the hardest hit and addressing inequities. This could include giving funds to prevent violence. There's been an uptick in violence around the state and around the country, to provide assistance to businesses and nonprofits. So again, the uses are quite broad in scope and don't have to be directly related to COVID, but also kind of focusing on the impacts that COVID has had to various groups. Third, addressing negative economic impacts. So again, assistance to businesses, nonprofits, things like that, but also could include frontline worker pay, so bonuses to individuals who have worked higher risk jobs. And then, as you're all well aware of, there was also funds focused on water, wastewater, and then broadband infrastructure. The payments are delivered by the U.S. Treasury in two different tranches. So there was the first half of these payments were provided to states, counties, cities, and towns last May, and then the second half of these amounts will be provided likely this May. And then the state and local governments have until December 31st of 2024 before to allocate these funds. But some of these longer-term projects, especially the infrastructure-related ones, on a cash basis, payments can be made all the way until the end of calendar year 2026. So again, these are funds that are very flexible in nature, can be used for a broad variety of things, and can be used over a longer horizon, as opposed to typical other funds that might be 1 year in nature. To dive a little deeper on the broadband portion, and so again, this applies to both local governments and state governments, and the Treasury has clarified that various levels of government can actually combine funds to focus on bigger projects that may cross jurisdictions and things. But they really want recipients, so state and local governments, to adhere to these three requirements. So first, that they identify an eligible area for investment, and they want this based on need. They define need in three ways: lack of access to reliable, high-speed broadband, lack of affordable broadband, and third, lack of reliable service. So they want first states and locals to focus on areas where there's the greatest need, then to design projects to meet high-speed technical standards. So at a minimum, they want 120, so 100 megabytes per second download speed and 20 upload. But they want to have these scalable to a symmetrical 100, 100 up and down. They prefer recipients to focus on fiber optic infrastructure where it's feasible, and then lastly, projects that will achieve last mile connections. Third, they want to require enrollment in a low-income subsidy program, and they kind of split this into two different ways. It could be that it directly participates in the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, or to have access to a program commensurate with the FCC's ACP standards. Separately, the guidance allows for modernization of cybersecurity investments related to broadband, and this could be both hardware or software. And then they stress that they really want state and local governments to focus on adhering to strong labor standards. So with these federal funds, there's typical requirements that we follow the Civil Rights Act and every kind of other restriction that normally applies to federal funds. And then furthermore, they kind of stress that they want not only states and locals to be following the law, but also to be going above and beyond and really adhering to strong labor standards and granting practices and things. So to look at the breakdown in local fiscal recovery funds, so again, these are the $2.1 billion that flows directly to counties and the 21 largest cities. So about $1.1 billion went directly to counties, $644 million to the 21 largest cities, and then $377 million came to the state to then disperse to cities and towns as small as a few people. They had the option to request funds, but they didn't have to take funds in a handful of towns, chose not to. But for the most part, about $2.1 billion will have gone out. We've sent the first tranche because, again, the Treasury is providing these funds in two separate checks about 1 year apart. So last May, we received the first half, and then we expect the second half to be dispersed to cities and towns by the end of June. By the end of June is the goal, but it is partially dependent on when the Treasury actually sends the check. Just want to stress that the kind of budget process varies between state and local governments. So the state, I'll dive kind of more in depth here of exactly how these funds were agreed to be used, but just want to say that at the local level, we had more local units of government than any other state. We had, I think it was over 2,000 NEUs, non-entitlement units, so small cities and towns, and there's over 2,000. That means there's over 2,000 different budgeting processes. So each city, county, town has their own allocation processes established for these types of things. At the state level, there was a three-part agreement between the governor, the House, and the Senate last year to use these funds in kind of three broad the guidance, in addition to those 4 eligible uses, public health, addressing inequities, things like that, the guidance provided a kind of separate option where, to the extent that state and local governments lost revenue because of COVID, so for example, if tax receipts went from 20 billion to 19 billion, you could take 1 billion and then kind of just use that as general revenue replacement. You kind of deposit that into your, in our case, the general fund. And so the state of Minnesota, as many other states and local government, identified more than $1 billion worth of lost revenue due to COVID. So the legislature and governor agreed to take 1.183 billion to put in the general fund over the next couple of years. They then set aside about 1.5 billion to debate this legislative session. So currently, the House and Senate are, debating how to use that. The governor came out with his decision to use it, and then in the meantime, since they knew that there was going to be this, gap, and at the time, we didn't know exactly what the effects of COVID were going to be, and we ended up having another 2 waves after this time. We had an agreement that 500 million would be set aside for a flexible pot of funds to respond to any immediate needs related to COVID. And so we have allocated more than 99% of these funds already on a variety of things, long-term care facilities and hospitals, a lot of money for testing and vaccination, rental assistance, things like that. So again, very broad in nature, trying to respond to COVID the best we can. Just to quickly touch on the other federal programmatic grants. So again, these are the 3.5 billion that flowed to the state, but are administered by specific agencies. So again, this includes everything from funds that went through the Department of Education down to school districts to help students catch up on learning, child care stabilization funds, assistance to businesses, things like that. There is some more information on our website, ms.gov/ARP, where we show all of the allocations that we've made out of the $500 million flexible pot. We have information on the local fiscal recovery funds. For example, the amount that each city, town, and county receive. And then we have a little bit of a breakdown on the federal programmatic funds to show some of the biggest items that are being administered through state agencies. I saw one question at least come through the chat. So is anyone tracking the utilization of the local ARP funds in Minnesota for broadband? So right at the start of the pandemic, Congress passed the CARES Act, which had coronavirus relief funds, which were similar to these state and local fiscal recovery funds in that they were flexible in nature and went to state governments and local governments. And for those funds, the state of Minnesota was required to do all of the reporting to the U.S. Treasury for not only state expenditures, but also for all of the local government expenditures. So we do have pretty detailed tracking on the local coronavirus relief funds. However, for the local fiscal recovery funds, the Treasury is having counties, cities, and towns be responsible for their own reporting. So we don't have any centralized reporting down to the line item of what local governments are spending their local fiscal recovery funds on. So we do not have a single source to get that. The U.S. Treasurer will be coming out with reports to show how states and locals are allocating their funds as they roll up all of the reporting from municipalities and such. But we don't have a breakdown of what local governments have been spending their funds on. I'll just say 2 quick things. One is that we do have the allocation, so we do know the amount that each receives. And secondly, I'll just say that most cities and towns experience a loss in revenue. And just speculating, I'm assuming that a lot of them will, on paper, be taking advantage of the lost revenue, the ability to just kind of put it into their budget without having to do quarterly reporting to the U.S. Treasury on specifically every single project that they've been using these funds on. For those interested in specific areas, I would reach out to the city or county you're interested in. Again, you can see on our website how much they receive, but we don't centrally have what they spend in the funds on. Any other questions on state and local fiscal recovery funds before we dive into the capital project fund? And Liz dropped in the chat that local governments can use revenue replacement portions. So even if they identify that all of it is revenue loss, they can still use those funds for broadband, but just kind of have a little more freedom in how exactly they're allocating them. Great point. And if there are no questions on that, I will kick it over to Mary Ann Convoy.
Thank you. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Mary Ann Convoy. I'm the Capital Budget Coordinator at MMB, and I'm presenting about the American Rescue Plan's Capital Projects Fund. The Capital Projects Fund provides payments to states, territories, freely associated states, and tribal governments to, quote, carry out critical capital projects directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency COVID-19. So the U.S. Department of Treasury released guidance in September of 2021, which includes information about the process and the project eligibility. So the Capital Project Fund allocation to the state of Minnesota is $180.7 million. And just for some background, of this amount, the Minnesota legislature has already appropriated $70 million of that for DEED's border-to-border broadband grant program. And in the fund, all the funds have to be expended by December 31st, 2026. This is not a competitive grant program from the federal government. Recipients, it's kind of unique in that recipients have to come to Treasury and basically work through them in order to receive the funding upfront before the funds are received to the state. Also, the recipients have to return to Treasury any grant funds that are not used by the period of performance end, which is December 31st, 2026. Although Treasury can, in its sole discretion, provide for exceptions or grant exceptions. So this slide shows the process for Minnesota to receive the funds from Treasury. So the current status of this is that Minnesota has already submitted its application to Treasury for the full allocation to the state. So basically, we've already said we would like to receive the full $180.7 million. Next, Minnesota also has signed its grant agreement, and that's in place. Then, of the total allocation, with the legislature having appropriated the $70 million to this border-to-border broadband grant program, DEED has applied to Treasury for those funds. So that's in progress and not done yet with Treasury. And we're hearing from other states too that they haven't acted quickly on submitted program plans, such as this one for the $70 million for broadband yet. But we hope to hear back soon. And then for the balance, the $110.7 million, Minnesota must submit all final plans for the funds by September 24th, 2022. And then states will receive the federal funds for each plan as it's approved by Treasury. So the legislature could appropriate the balance of the Capital Projects Fund in this 2022 legislative session. And if not, the governor has the authority granted through the LAC process to go ahead and submit plans and start I just want to highlight that in order to be an eligible use of the capital projects fund, there's 3 criteria that have to be met. The capital project invests in capital assets designed to directly enable work, education, and health monitoring. The "and" is emphasized there. All 3 have to be met. The capital project is designed to address a critical need that resulted from or was made apparent or exacerbated by COVID-19. And the capital project is designed to address a critical need of the community to be served by it. And so here, according to Treasury's guidance, the following types of capital projects are presumptively eligible, ineligible, or would have a case-by-case review. So the presumptively eligible are broadband, digital connectivity, and multi-purpose community facility projects. And I'll get into details about each of these in the following slides. Ineligible projects, presumed not to be eligible, are like general infrastructure projects, things that you would find in like the state's bonding bill, like highways, transit systems, ports, just general construction projects. And then Treasury has opened the door to doing a case-by-case review in case there's something that falls that you think would meet the criteria in this previous slide, but doesn't fall within the presumptively eligible projects. So the first category that you're probably most interested in is the broadband infrastructure projects. So this would be for the construction and deployment of broadband infrastructure. They have specific download and upload speed requirements listed in the guidance, and you have to explain like why the communities identified to be served have a critical need related to access, affordability, reliability, and or consistency. It requires that service providers participate in federal programs that provide low-income consumers with subsidies, and participation in the FCC Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And it encourages last-mile connections, fiber optics, certain providers, consultation with the state's broadband office, and addressing affordability as a barrier. Those are just some highlights from the guidance, which I'm happy to share with you, that it really gets into some details there. I also want to share about digital connectivity technology projects, one of the other presumptively eligible uses. This is for the purchase and or installation of devices and equipment that facilitate broadband internet access, where affordability has been identified as a barrier to broadband adoption and use. So you have to explain when you apply to Treasury with your program or with a project why the communities identified have a critical need. And permitted items that you would be purchasing with these funds would be laptops, tablets, personal computers, things like for loan, for example, and made available in public facilities. Equipment would be like access points, repeaters, routers, etc., things that are part of public Wi-Fi infrastructure. And then finally, the last use, the multi-purpose community facility projects. This would be for the construction or the improvement of buildings that are designed to jointly enable work, education, and health monitoring. And so you have to also explain why the communities identified to be served have a critical need. And so that's just another area of funding that's available, or of presumptively eligible projects that would be under this fund. And there's some detail here that I provide about like what kind of facilities this would be, because it's kind of open-ended, but one example would be like in a library, when you make improvements to a library, that provides for all those 3 categories: work, education, and health monitoring. So here I've linked Treasury's website and the guidance and allocation information, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Again, if anybody has any questions, either raise your hand or come off mute. Marianne, I have one quick question for you. So you mentioned the obviously we applied for the 70 million and kind of waiting to hear back from Treasury soon, right? So as soon as we hear back from them, what's the process of then making those funds available to like the Office of Broadband Development for disbursement?
Yep. So essentially, my understanding is that Treasury will review the program information that that Deed submitted about the border-to-border broadband infrastructure program, and if there's any tweaks that they need to make it eligible to the fund, there's in the appropriation language of the state, there's a clause that says that we can adjust if we need to meet Treasury's criteria to go ahead and spend the funds, like whatever we need to do to the program to spend. But presuming that like the program works, then essentially Deed would receive the funds and start spending according to the normal process with the border-to-border broadband grant program.
Got it. Okay. So as soon as the Treasury approves the application and says it's ready, I mean, we could take action on that.
Yes. Yep.
Got it. Steve Georgie, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me, but I didn't understand the September deadline. The request, and then the governor has the authority.
Oh, sure. So basically, the Treasury has set a timeline for like states like us to go ahead and tell them how we plan to spend the funds. So they want to know, how is the state of Minnesota, for example, going to spend the $180.7 million that we have allocated, and we have to submit a final plan to them that we can't change after that date on September 24th, 2022. So of those three eligible uses, broadband, digital connectivity, multi-purpose community facility projects, we have to basically show how much is going to be in each bucket, and within each bucket, what are the details of the programs or the projects that the state is proposing to fund with those. So that's like an upcoming quick timeline in September of either the legislature appropriating it this session or the governor afterwards, if it's not appropriated this session, then the governor would allocate the funds under his authority. But that allocation decision has to be decided by the state by September.
Got it. If there's no direction after this session, potentially the governor has the authority to decide how it gets used.
That's right.
Any other questions for Marianne? Marianne, I'm not seeing any hands up or anybody coming off mute. So thank you so much. And Elizabeth, I think it's back to you.
Great, thank you. Let me pull up my screen. All right, so my area will cover the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This really is a piece of legislation that goes by many names. The IIJA is the one that we most often use, but you might also hear it referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the BIL, and it all refers to the same thing. So just to give a quick overview, first I'll go into kind of a high-level description of what is in the bill and what it means for Minnesota. Talking about the matching funds that exist in the governor's budget that will unlock those federal funds from the IIJA, and then covering any questions that we don't get to during the presentation. So this is a really high-level view of what is in the IIJA. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides $1.2 trillion total over 5 years from fiscal year 2022 through 26. And it's essentially two different omnibus bills packaged into one. Roughly $650 million of the bill includes the reauthorization of the Federal Surface Transportation Program, and this is represented by the big blue slice of the pie in the left-hand pie chart. The remaining $550 million is really general infrastructure investments that focus on everything from roads and bridges to transit, water, energy, climate resilience, and broadband, of course. You're only seeing a small slide. Are others having trouble seeing this?
Yeah, I think we're still seeing your title slide that says infrastructure investments and job act overview.
Really? Okay.
I'm seeing the slide that has the two pie charts.
Yeah, I'm seeing the pie charts too.
I'm seeing the pie charts as well.
Okay. So maybe it's a little slow to progress. So I'll pull it up again. We'll see if that solves the problem for those of you who aren't seeing the full picture.
Pie charts are up now.
Okay, great. Hopefully that takes care of it. This big chunk here, the blue chunk here, is representative of the reauthorization of the Federal Surface Transportation Program, and the smaller slices of the pie are all of the general infrastructure investments, ranging from roads and bridges and transit, climate, and of course broadband. And so focusing specifically on broadband, there are really, of the $65 billion in total in the bill, that falls across 7 major program areas. The biggest one that I think folks have heard the most about is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program, and that represents about $42.5 million of the $65 million. There's also money for affordable connectivity, for digital equity planning, capacity, and competitive grants, for tribal broadband connectivity, rural broadband, the middle mile broadband infrastructure program, and then a smaller portion of that is available for private activity bonds. The two pieces of those 7 that at this point the state is, I think, most focused on are the BEAD grants and then the digital equity planning and capacity grants. So I'll get into a bit more information. So focusing on the BEAD program, this is the big pot of money that I think is getting a lot of attention in the IIJA. It's a formula-based program for states, territories, and the District of Columbia, and every entity is guaranteed a minimum grant of $100 million. It really can be used kind of soup to nuts in broadband. It could be planning, it could be devices, it could be actual provision of broadband service to certain types of households. States will receive the money. So in this case, for Minnesota, it would be the Office of Broadband Development, a DEED, would receive the money and then dole that money out to subgrantees based on a competitive grant process. And so the state, in other words, is not the end recipient of these funds. Instead, it will go out to entities that could include businesses, partnerships, political subdivisions like cities or counties, tribes, and certain types of cooperative and corporate organizations. As a condition of receiving BEAD grants, the grantees, subgrantees, I should say, are obligated to offer a low-cost internet plan as part of their services. So once every entity has received that minimum $100 million allocation, there will be another sort of a second round of allocations that are based on a formula that considers the number of locations in each state that are underserved by broadband and those that are high-cost locations that are underserved. So of the 7.4, I guess you know what, I'm going to skip back up for just 1 second. So of the whole pie, of the 1.2 trillion, Minnesota is estimated to receive about 7.4 billion. That's what we so far feel pretty confident in based on formula allocations and grant programs that we think we're really well positioned to receive. And so this slide dives into how that money breaks down across state agencies. So as you can see, it really further illustrates the IIJA's focus on transportation. And so obviously MnDOT is going to play a key role in implementation, roads, bridges, airports, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. There's also a lot of funding for transit, which is represented by the 1.2 million for Met Council. Among other highlights, of course, there's the broadband component, but there's also money for weatherization assistance. There's money for cybersecurity. So it really is a very wide-ranging bill. And what you might notice, which is really in stark contrast to what you heard from Tom a few minutes ago, is that there is no big flexible pot of money like we had with the CRF or the state and local fiscal recovery funds, where there's some flexibility to allocate that based on whatever needs are emerging. The IIJA is really a bill that is an omnibus of a whole bunch of different specific federal grant programs, both formula programs and competitive programs that would flow from the federal agencies to state governments and other entities. So I'll get into matching funds. So there was that previous slide that showed that most of the funds coming to Minnesota do require non-federal matches. And so the next few slides go over that in a bit more detail. And so the governor's budget, where it's possible, the governor's budget, both the supplemental and capital budgets, included recommendations that corresponded to a number of program categories in the IIJA that required matching funds. So the biggest piece is the roads and bridges, transit and airports, and other areas where the Department of Transportation has a budget item that would provide the required non-state match for the federal funds in those programs. There's also nearly $700 million for clean, safe drinking water infrastructure in the IIJA. And so the governor's capital budget includes an item that would essentially unlock the federal dollars in those water infrastructure programs. Skipping ahead, of course, to broadband, the biggest pot of money is, of course, the BEAD program. And since the state is not the end recipient of those grants, it would be the subgrantees, not the state itself, that would be responsible for providing the 25% non-state match. And so this is where I want to draw back to the item that I dropped in the chat about local governments being able to use the revenue replacement portion of their recovery funds on broadband. They really can use recovery funds for their match for any program in the IIJA. The final rule of the American Rescue Plan has allowed considerable flexibility within the revenue replacement portion of funding so that state and local entities can use that to the extent possible to match the federal sources of funding in the IIJA. Then in addition to the big $100 million BEAD program that we're anticipating receiving, the state is also eligible to receive state digital equity planning grants to study feasibility and to establish a strategic plan around broadband deployment, as well as digital equity capacity grants. And those can also be used for feasibility studies and planning. Those three programs, the BEAD grants, the planning grants, and the capacity grants, have all been approved by the Legislative Advisory Commission, which Marianne mentioned in her remarks, as of April 8th. So that will give DEED's Office of Broadband Development the legal spending authority needed to implement those programs as those grants become available to the state. So in other words, the Office of Broadband Development will be ready to go once that the funding and the program requirements are made clear. And then finally, just a quick overview, the IIJA also includes a considerable amount of funding for climate-related programs. And so there are a couple of supplemental budget items that unlock the climate funding, or at least as much of it as we can reasonably anticipate. We we know that there will probably be more opportunities in the climate space than what we've budgeted for, but this is at least kind of a starting place for the state to be able to plan. And then finally, cybersecurity grants. The state's IT agency, Minute, has a supplemental budget item that carries the matching funds for the cybersecurity money in the IIJA. And then just to sort of frame up that content, same content in a little bit different way, this is a sort of change item view, both within the supplemental and capital budgets, that shows you all of the budget proposals the governor has put forward this session to unlock matching funds in the IIJA. It totals about $390 million in this biennium and almost $400 million in the next biennium. So the IIJA is big, obviously, and given the typical match, which is often 20% in some programs, it does require the state to put forward some considerable resources to be able to unlock those dollars. So part of what we're doing is to work closely with the legislature to help them understand the need and the urgency to get our non-state or our non-federal matching dollars in place. So it looks like there's a question, the plan for allocation of the $100 million of BEAD funds. So this is where I would probably, I'm not sure if Angie or Devin is on the call. I think they will be running that plan. So I would probably have to defer to them about what they anticipate doing as part of their RFP process for grants. I'm not sure if they can speak to that. Otherwise, I'm happy to coordinate.
Liz, Diane Welch is on from the Office of Broadband.
Oh, great. Thanks,
We're waiting on a couple of things, as Devin noted sorry, I'm getting some feedback, but as Devin noted on his slide, Senate File 4019, the Senate bill has the IIJ money for broadband going into border to border, so we're waiting to see what happens in session. Also, the NOFA is not out. It should, by law, come out in mid-May, so that will provide us with a lot more information. So more to come on that, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Micah Myers has a question.
Just basically, will the presentations we saw here today be made available to the task force?
Yeah, I think we can share our slides. I think we've all done versions of these presentations to other groups, so we can package them all together and then send it out to maybe Diane and Teddy, and then you all can send it to the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. One quick question on obviously $100 million is not dependent upon the FCC maps, but depending on the FCC mapping, you could receive more, right? Depending on each state. Now, is the $100 million tied to that map? Do those maps have to be completed before that is given to the states, or is it independent?
This is Diane again. I think that will be clarified more in the NOFO.
Okay.
There is a lot to that point, Diane. There are a lot of programs in the IIJA that are we're waiting on more detail for. Some of these programs are being built on the fly, and so we're trying to position ourselves as well as we can, and local governments will be doing the same. But until more details come out from the federal government, it is sort of a challenge. I think a lot of us have probably more questions than answers at this point, unfortunately.
That makes sense. And I have another question, and the answer may be the same, which is I have to wait to see. But if the maps, the FC completes the maps, and let's say it's another $50 million is required, right? That's what can be allocated to Minnesota. Does that change the pie chart, or does the state get more funding, additional funding from Treasury?
That would effectively change the pie chart, because right now what our pie chart assumes is the formula funding essentially, but we have not factored in any additional competitive grants, which I think we would consider anything above the $100 million as competitive because it's based on meeting certain criteria. That would just add to the slice of the pie.
Okay. Any other questions from task force members? raise a hand. I'm off mute. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands and not off mute. So Elizabeth, Marianne, and Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. This was extremely helpful and kind of clarifying, although I know there's still more questions, but in general, from sort of the overview was perfect. And I think this also helps us understand where we are in session and even some of the recommendations we might make here in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so that was the presentation. Hopefully you are able to get some information out of that, maybe answer some questions you may have had. Again, the material, as mentioned, we'll try to get the presentations, and along with the meeting minutes, we'll try to circulate that as well. So this pretty much concludes for the bulk of the agenda for today. The last remaining piece is just any other outstanding items. Is there anything else that the task force has thought of since our kind of before we went on break earlier that we want to bring up at this point? I'm not seeing any hands up. Anybody else? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, Teddy, I apologize to the task force members, but I think we would be remiss if we don't discuss the line extension bill that's included in the Senate omnibus. If they're going to take 15 million of the 25 million allocated, it doesn't leave much for communities. And I believe it's the mission of the task force to do what's in the best interest of all Minnesotans to meet the goal. And that program seems to be ahead of the curve, where maybe in 3 years, we're going to find those isolated pockets where a line extension grant program might make more sense. I just, the way that things are going, I just think we need to take a position that we don't support. They should have had a fiscal note. If they wanted to do that, they should have had their own fiscal note and got their own funding. That's my opinion.
Thoughts from others?
It's really not up to the. I think it's up to the legislature to request a fiscal note, isn't it? I don't know that that's. And we didn't take a position on the electric co-op bill last year, so I think there's a lot of moving parts in the final weeks of this session. If we're going to take a position on anything as a task force, we've got to take a position on why we're at $25 million in a House omnibus budget for broadband funding. I mean, there's a couple articles out already. We've gone from 100 million. I know there's a lot of different pots going around, but we're now almost 2.5 years that we're coming out of this pandemic, and there's not been one shovel project done. Meanwhile, we're getting lapped by other states in broadband. My company's playing in the Wisconsin Broadband Fund right now, which is at 100 million. And we were all the models 5-6 years ago, and now we're the paltry cousin in terms of funding. So it's kind of editorially thought I'd share.
Can I give a public comment? Hello?
Yes. Please identify.
Can I give public comment?
Yeah, who is this?
This is John Bassing. I live in northern Minnesota. And I've worked with Blandon in the past trying to bring broadband to our area. I live in Greenwood Township. I listened to the Ways and Means Committee this week, and I saw them drop the amount of funding from 100 million to 25 million. If you go back to the original legislation in 2010 and you look at the goals set by the legislature, it's actually a joke. It's been 12 years. You've had a whole slew of kids from kindergarten through 12th grade now that in outstate areas are technologically disadvantaged. And by the time that we get the next generation, will be technologically disadvantaged also. We've got $9+ billion in a surplus. We've got Rescue Act money coming in, and we can't even fund broadband. I listened to Rob Eklund say to do the whole state would be $1.3 billion. At $25 million a year, that would take 50 years. You folks are going to have to try to put some pressure on, or you're going to have to find descendants to carry this forward. And we are getting lapped by Wisconsin, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota. We're actually at 27 now if you go to getinternet.com. And we're going to drop down on that list as these states move forward. And this is a simple thing, and it's really embarrassing, and it's shameful, actually. And I talked to Representative Eklund about it. He said the cable industry cut their knees off on them. Well, if you're going to have a copper wire industry cut out fiber, well, then we're might as well close shop. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Teresa?
Oh, you're on mute there, Teresa.
Hang on. I'm in the cable industry, and we're a fiber backbone, and pretty much everything we're doing now is fiber to the premise, fiber to everything. So we're not copper. Thank you. And I support the line extension program as another solution. They are doing it in other states. I think it's something that we need to look at. And it's just going to be pockets. Yes, it's not going to be overwhelming for DEED or the Office of Broadband Development. They're on board with it. So thank you. And I agree about the funding. Yeah, we're stalled. We don't have enough right now. It's embarrassing.
Thank you, Teresa. Steve Fensky?
On the line extension, I liked the idea, but when it was posed to us, the targets weren't released, so the money was a lot higher. So maybe our letter can point out the concern that cutting the amount of money that's going to be dedicated to this and adding the line extension will have an effect on what goes into the broadband, the base program. And that's a fair thing to point out. It doesn't oppose the line extension, but it says this makes more sense when you add all the money in that you were talking about in the first place.
Thank you, Steve. That's a good point. Brian?
Yeah, just to echo Steve's comments, I testified in Representative Pulowski's committee and have no problem with the line extension, but I think the consensus was we needed $100 million plan to be able to do all of the above. So just again to echo Steve's comments that it's critical to get that funding, and I appreciated the comments from the public comment there that we really need to send that message that this needs to be a priority. And like I said, we just seen a presentation of the billions of dollars coming into the state. We need to somehow get this as a focus, as a priority to move our state forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Mark Johnson?
Yeah, thanks. Steve, I agree. Brian, you too. I think it made sense when there was a lot more money. I always kind of said it was maybe ahead of its time, the line extension I'm talking about. Maybe ahead of its time just a little bit, but yes, with a larger pot of money, it certainly made sense, and I think pointing that out would be important in the letter. And then to go back on that, do we know, and I don't know if Devin's still on or anybody's still on, I believe the line extensions in the Senate bill, was there any movement on it was in the Senate, was there any movement on it in the House? In other words, is that going to come into play? Just a question, in case anybody knows.
I'm still on. I don't think there's movement on it. It wasn't in the omnibus bill. I'd have to check to see if it's still moving as a standalone, but I would doubt it, since the $25 million target that House Industrial Ed received was all put toward border to border.
Thank you.
other comments? Okay, is there any other comments from anyone else that's not on the task force that want to make a public comment at this point in time? Okay. Well, I don't see anything else. So, again, I think we all agree that, we need to send a message. We'll craft the letter. Again, it needs to be concise, but have the right points in it. We'll circulate this with the task force members early next week, with the idea that before any sort of votes go on, we'll try to get this letter in the hands of, before session ends. I mean, then there's a combination between House and Senate and what happens there. So, a lot more to come here in the next couple of weeks. So I think we'll send our message that way. And I think, there's all the different funding coming, and I think where people get lost a little bit is also, there's funding from here, there's funding from there, and we don't need to allocate anything. But I think we just need to also clearly show that the fact that what needs to be allocated is taking all those things into consideration. And so therefore that's why this is required. So I'll get that out to the team, and then we can work on it together and get it submitted. Bernadine, I see you have your hands up. Maybe you have another comment.
Yeah, thank you, Teddy. I want to thank the task force for a really excellent discussion today and the presentation, and I'm really pleased that we're going to use our voice to put this letter forward. And I just wanted to ask, Teddy, is there any opportunity to reinforce the letter with testimony? Will there be any opportunities to speak or to bring this in a more forceful way to the legislature?
Yeah, that's kind of up to them if they request for it, but that's the idea. Like the letter starts, and then we can point to that and say if you'd like more details, we'd be happy to expand on it.
Good.
Steve Fensky?
I just don't know what to expect with the letter. Is it going to include the statement of concern about funding related to the line extension?
So I haven't noted down, Steve. Let's see if I can include it, just so you said that there's a concern with it, right? That's what it would have to say.
It's fair to say, yeah, something related to concern about splitting the money when we reduce the amount of money.
Yeah, the first thing is the funding itself, right? Kind of addressing that, and then saying, if we consider line extensions, that's more of you got to have the funding first in place to be able to consider line extension. If not, there's a concern that this would actually create more issues.
Okay.
Teresa?
Yeah, that's a fair point, what everyone's talking about. I just want to note that the presentations we had today had a lot of information, and they are going to be hopefully emailed to us and not just posted on the website.
I mean, they'll be posted, but I can email them to you.
It'd be nice just to have the email instead of forgetting about it, and then I have them and I don't have to go search for them. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much for the conversation. Again, a couple of action items before our next meeting. And we'll look forward to your responses by email. So with that, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.